Hey there, it's Chris from Good Roads. Hope everybody is keeping well. I've got a couple projects coming up that I want to tackle on the channel that require material that is a very specific thickness. I've got a snowboard core I need to profile, and I want to do a number of other composite builds where the ability to control that thickness precisely would enable me to build boards in a way that I've never been able to do before. Now I do have a planer, but it's a pretty cheap one. It works really well for the broad strokes, but I don't trust it for anything that requires any level of precision. So I'm going to build a thicknessing drum sander. A drum sander can be a pretty simple machine. It's essentially a drum wrapped in sandpaper, driven by a motor, with an adjustable bed below it. And that's how you get your thickness. You slide your material along the bed, and the drum sands it down. It's not too complicated, right? Well, that's the machine for me. And seeing as right now I can't really afford one of the professionally made ones, I'll take a stab at making one myself. This was the plan I had going into the shop. A very precise, well thought out plan, I know. But we have a drum, we have a motor, a bed, and height adjustment, and a frame to house it all. So let's try to get this thing off of the page and into reality. I had bought this rubber roller a while back, and I was planning on using it with a different machine, but this is a machine that I have a need for now, so I'm going to base my drum around this chunk of rubber. I also designed and 3D printed these two end caps. They extend the width of the drum, and will hold the rubber roller in place on the axle. Each cap also has 3 embedded nuts. 2 are for set screws that lock the caps in place on the axle, and the third is a clamp that will hold the sandpaper in place on either end of the drum. The whole machine needs to be based around this drum, so I took some measurements and started getting to work. The first component that I built was the height adjustable bed. I cut a sheet of 1/2-inch plywood to make the flat surface of the bed, and then ripped 2 additional strips out of the cutoffs. I'm going to build the whole bed as sort of a wide I-beam. I'm hoping that will help keep it nice and stiff and flat. So the 2 additional strips are going to be the reinforcements on either side of the bed. I routed some dados in the side pieces so I could get a really strong joint. And then cut everything to length. Then glued and tacked the pieces together. While the glue for that was drying up, I started working on the frame of the machine. I started by building out one of the sides, using some heavier lumber towards the bottom to keep the machine solid. And we need 2 of those, so I built a second one. Next, I started joining the 2 sides together, using clamps to keep things in place while I glued, drilled, and screwed together all of the parts. A drum sander is a pretty niche tool, and while I know I'll need it for specific tasks, I don't expect to be using it all the time. With that in mind, I added some locking casters to the bottom of the frame, so I can roll it out of the way when I don't need it. The upper crossbars on the frame are actually going to be the base for the adjustable bed. So once the glue was dry, I dropped the bed in place and started getting an idea of how the upper part of the machine was going to go together. The motor, drum, and bed all have to work in tandem, so I grabbed those two parts as well to help me refine my spacing. And that was looking pretty good. The top of the sides of the frame were feeling a little slim with the motor and bearing blocks up there, so I took some time to reinforce them. The whole frame is made of scrap wood, by the way, and a good amount of it came from a broken down crate. This isn't a very expensive build. I'm just hoping that this machine will last me until I can afford one of the professionally made ones. Once I had beefed up the sides, I added a little shelf for the motor. And while that was drying, I moved over and reinforced the ends of the sanding bed. We're going to be mounting some hardware here later, so I wanted to make sure it was substantial. Once the glue was dry, construction on the frame and bed was complete. So I did a little cleanup for aesthetics and to get rid of any sharp corners. I drilled the mounting holes for the drum bearing blocks. And I also cut recesses in the walls of the bed so that the sanding drum can get really close to the surface. Next, it was time to start assembling the drum. I cut the axle to length and dressed the ends. Then I slipped the rubber roller onto the axle and shimmed it using some really precise printed shims that I made. Next, I slid the end caps into place. Then added the bearings and the drive pulley, and tightened down all the set screws. The sander was starting to come together. In preparation for assembly, I hit the top of the frame with some green paint to match the motor and for aesthetics. Once the paint was dry, I pulled the tape off and hey, we're looking pretty good. Let's start putting this thing together. For height adjustment, I printed these two parts. The first holds a top hat nut and attaches to the frame, and part of this print also acts like the nylon ring in a nylock nut, so it'll help keep my bolt from slipping. The second printed part is a knob that gets a bolt threaded through it. Once these are screwed in place, I can use the knob to move the bed up and down. So let's drop the bed in place, and use some hinges to keep it stable, but still allow it to move in the direction we want. Nice, that's working perfectly. Next, I needed to drill mounting holes for the motor and bolt it in place. Once the motor and drum were secured, it was time to stand very far away and make sure nothing exploded.
Okay. Loud.
Adjusting the positions on some of the parts on the drum helped with all that noise though. Once everything was spinning smoothly, I needed to make sure that the drum was flat and even. So I took a sheet of grip tape and attached it to a board and used that to sand the drum flat. Then it was time to load the sandpaper. And hey, look at that. It's working pretty good. I absolutely need dust collection though, and getting some kind of shield around my drum will also help keep me safe if my cobbled together system ever throws a bolt or anything like that. So, using some 1/4-inch plywood, I knocked together a quick box to go around the drum, making sure that there were slats for the axle and the side supports on the bed. And I also cut a hole in the top of that box that sawdust can get sucked through. I 3D printed some tension clips to hold the hood in place. These should keep it secure and will also make it easy for me to remove the hood when I need to replace the sandpaper. And I also printed this connector that allows me to hook the hood up to my shop vac. And with everything connected, let's see how it runs. Works pretty darn good. It's definitely slow, but I think it's because my drum sander's a little underpowered compared to professionally built ones. The motor that I'm using is an old 1/3 of a horsepower motor that I got from my grandpa, and I think he got it from a drill press. It's pretty heavy duty, and I'm sure some extra horsepower would go a long way, but I'm not doing this in a production setting, so if I need to go slow and take my time, I think this machine is gonna work just fine for what I need. Now, if I'm being straight with you guys, this build was cursed. Something went wrong every step of the way. Just as an example, the drum sander is currently running using the drive belt from my drill press. Why? Because the other 3 drive belts that I had in the shop somehow disappeared right when I needed them. How does that even happen? How do you lose 3 drive belts? So that's what this build was like. Just a lot of things not going the way that I needed them to. But I'm very happy with how it runs. I'm super impressed with how effective the dust collection is, and I'm really relieved that for the most part, this build is done. I've still gotta get a drive belt and probably make a belt cover. But not today. And being stuck in the drum sander doldrums has only gotten me more excited to get back to the projects that we normally do here on the channel, get back to some board building. And there are a ton of cool projects in the works that I'm super excited about and I can't wait to share with you guys. Obviously, we're gonna be using the drum sander to profile my snowboard core and continue on with the snowboard build, but there's a lot of other really awesome stuff coming too. And I can't wait for you guys to see them. So, stay tuned, subscribe if you haven't. If you got any questions or comments, leave them below. I'll do my best to respond. And until next time, I'll see you soon. A drum sander is a pretty niche tool, and niche. A drum sander is a pretty niche tool. Niche.